The chair will call to order tonight's special meeting of the Board of Education. Roll call, please.
Mr. Marin?
Here.
Ms. Hoover?
Here.
Ms. Steckity?
Here.
Ms. Coyle?
Here.
Ms. Redonio?
Here.
Mr. Avia?
Here.
Ms. Conover?
Here. Okay. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, the first item on the agenda is public comment. I'm just going to read a statement about our guidelines. Public comment is a time for the community to address the board with comments and questions. Each community member addressing the board has 5 minutes. Once you have been notified your time is up, please step away from the podium. Public comment will be for 30 minutes with no more than each subject lasting 20 minutes. Please understand this is not a time for engagement. The board will consider your comments in its decisions. For those comments or questions requiring a follow-up response, the board president or superintendent will follow up. The first comment is from Susanna Moreno. Go ahead.
As a student at Westmont High School, I am pleading for the continuation of a mask mandate within our school. I personally have gotten COVID. At the beginning of the second semester this year, I tested positive, and I am a person who wears their mask correctly. I try to sit on the edge of classrooms for social distancing purposes, and when tested, I let every person I came into contact know that my test was positive. Because of the precautions I have taken since the beginning of the pandemic, not a single other person, not even people within my household, contracted the virus. I wore a mask anytime I left my room in the house because if my grandma had gotten COVID, I sincerely doubt she would have avoided hospitalization. She has congestive heart failure and asthma, and my mom has an autoimmune disorder. I interact with immunocompromised people every single day, and I worry for their safety. In addition to my direct family, there are immunocompromised and at-risk students at my school, including cancer survivors and their families. If masks become optional, you are putting people at risk. People with weaker immune systems will have to compensate at expense of their own time, resources, quality of education, and safety. Some students will not be able to attend school, and no current remote options at all are available right now. There aren't many accommodations either. It's difficult to keep up grades and have a natural high school experience, I know from my week of quarantine. Even for perfectly healthy students, the worry is still there. Putting the stress of having to worry about our own health, safety, and well-being onto students and teachers on top of everything else we have on our plates for other people's personal comfort isn't maintainable, and problems are absolutely inevitable. Me and my friends and many others can attest to not wanting to contract COVID-19, and I can attest that having COVID sucks even if you're vaccinated, which I am. I had symptoms when I had COVID, and honestly, I'm kind of glad that I did, because I might not have known I had COVID and could have spread it unknowingly, even with precautions I take because someone else may not be wearing a mask correctly. As stated before, that would have been detrimental to some of the people I know. If mask wearing is optional, more asymptomatic people not wearing masks who assume they're fine will spread the virus to people around them. Having people be able to choose whether they want to help keep others safe by wearing a mask isn't fair to those who can't risk getting infected. And isn't fair even to people who simply do not want to get infected. At Westmont High School, our school motto is be respectful, be responsible, and to celebrate success. When it comes down to it, wearing masks in school is the most respectful and responsible option when it comes to this ruling. Respectful for keeping others' situations in mind, immunocompromisation, and such. Responsible because CDC public health guidelines have not changed when it comes to mask recommendations and the safety that comes with wearing masks. Being courteous of others is an important value at our school, and lifting a mandate that keeps my peers anxiety-free and safe is not what is best for our school. Being successful at WHS means keeping our community safe, which in turn makes everyone able to contribute to the betterment of our education. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next public comment is from Gabrielle Barada.
So, in the summer of '02, that's 1902, not 2002, with smallpox spreading rapidly in America,
A man named Henning Jacobson in Cambridge, Massachusetts went before the courts to argue against a $5 fine he had received for defying a recent local ordinance that required all persons to receive a smallpox inoculation. A verdict of guilty was returned, and the case was then elevated to the Supreme Judicial Court. The decision of the court was that although Jacobson indeed had a constitutional right to liberty, when that liberty was brought up against the health of the community, the maxim of salus populi supreme lex, the health of the people is supreme law, came out on top. In the words of the court, the liberty secured by the Constitution of the United States does not import an absolute right in each person to be, at all times, in all circumstances, wholly freed from restraint, nor is it an element in such liberty that one person or a minority of persons residing in any community and enjoying the benefits of its local government should have power to dominate the majority. And it is a fundamental principle of the social contract that the whole people covenants with each citizen and each citizen with the whole people. The court concluded that all should be governed by certain laws for the common good, and that government is instituted for the common good, for the protection, safety, prosperity, and happiness of the people, and not for the profit, honor, or private interest of any one man, family, or class of men. In other words, not my words, but other words, there are manifold restraints to which every person is necessarily subject for the common good. On any other basis, organized society could not exist with safety to its members. Americans get all the benefits of civil society, cooperation, good government, potable water, public health protection, democracy, and even liberty itself, agreeing in turn that there may be times when individual interests must give way to the needs of society. Our society functions and has functioned for tens of thousands of years on the basis of taking care of each other, dating back to before even agriculture or trade. That is how we have survived for so long. That is how we have evolved to the level that we are at today. And that is how the human race continues to survive. Do you know what happens to the humans who decide that their personal comfort trumps the safety to other humans? They are ostracized from the group because that behavior is not conducive to survival. Why now are we humoring this selfish behavior? Why are we passively allowing greater health to be compromised in favor of the childish demands of those who have never learned or refuse to apply empathy and respect? It is not fair to the students and staff who are either at risk themselves or have at-risk family members to remove the mask mandate. A place that students are lawfully obligated to attend has to be safe for them. Just off the top of my head, I can think of 5 people with parents who are going through or have gone through cancer and whose lives would very likely be jeopardized or even lost if they were to contract COVID. We have a cancer survivor currently attending our school. This is not an issue of politics or scientific debate that some people are desperately trying to make it. This is an issue of maintaining a safe and respectful learning environment so that everyone can have the best chance of success in their education without distractions or fear. In the words of Scott Burris, a professor of law at Temple University, elevating individual liberty over the common good will not get COVID-19 under control, nor help the nation face the ongoing challenges of social inequality, climate change, or deep social divisions. I really am struggling why this is up for debate in the first place. If you vote to optionalize masks, you are sending an astoundingly clear message to the students of WHS. You cannot be trusted to prioritize their health and safety while in school, or the health and safety of their family members when they go home. If students and their families are to trust the board and believe that it cares about them, the board needs to actually display that in their decisions. And when students are choosing to stay home from school or skip classes rather than risk infecting their baby siblings or compromised grandparents, you will have absolutely no one to blame but yourself. When teachers have to quarantine because they or their family got COVID and they cannot keep up with our education, you will have no one to blame but yourself. When grades drop and student mental health becomes even worse than it already is, you will have no one to blame but yourself. Are you going to be the ones to pay for the hospitalizations of those who cannot fight COVID? I hope you're ready for that fallout.
Thank you. The next public comment is from Melanie Sleeper.
Good evening. My name is Melanie Sleeper. I have 3 children in schools in this district. I have stood before this school board at least 5 times over the last 18 months. I know this because today I went back and rewatched several of those meetings. After listening to my own public comments, the one request I made at every single one of those meetings was for this school board to listen. Over the course of my public comments, I watched as I went from simply asking to be heard to sadly stating that I didn't think my words would be enough to telling you tonight that the voices of this community are not being represented by this school board. I have stood here and shared statistics that made sense to so many, only for you to not hear me. I've stood here alone on at least 2 occasions in the voice of dissent. I begged this school board to explain anything that would resemble common sense around mitigations, pivoting to remote and asynchronous learning. It fell on deaf ears. I stood here and shared the most vulnerable pieces and details of my family's experience so that you could see and understand the impact that your decisions have made on my children, their friends, and families in this district. It made no difference. None of the traumas shared or coincidences are isolated events. They are the direct results of decisions this board has made. So many unheard stakeholders have similar and overlapping stories of trauma, which are all direct results of this school board's lack of proper oversight and plain old inaction. Many of these parents have stood here, some crying, saying the very same things that I have said, only to be dismissed by your favorite canned responses of, "It's a fluid situation." Your decisions are rooted in fluid situations, unrealistic movement of goalposts, inadequate action, inconsistent mitigation enforcement, and quite frankly, mismanaged authority. What's even worse is that the school board has not heard anything that has been said. Well, now it's time to listen. I'm not standing here to share facts or statistics. I won't share any more stories about the exclusion mitigation's impact on my children's learning either, because there simply is not enough time. I'm here speaking on behalf of a large majority of people that you as a school board are elected and empowered to represent. I represent the people that you have not heard. It's time to really listen. We are not here to beg, plead, or ask you to consider our voice. We are here to remind you of the obligation of your position and role on this board. You are here to oversee the school district and dutifully serve this community and represent, through your votes, the majority. You have fallen short, and you have not listened to the majority, even though it is your elected and collective job to be our voice. The majority have been more than patient with this school board. The majority have rallied in constructive ways to deliberately approach this school board with data, information, and examples of what what happens inside these schools, only to be criticized on social media by the very people that are supposed to be our representatives. Your job is not to vote with your personal feelings or advance your personal agenda. Your job is to oversee the school district, listen to the people, and vote based on your majority's recommendations. Your behavior towards the majority clearly indicates that the majority's voice has not been heard, and tonight you will listen. Lastly, on behalf of the majority of families in this district, I am asking for you to individually and collectively dig deep and be the voice, even if it is in dissent. I'm asking you to uphold the oaths you took as representatives of this majority. Really listen. We implore you to be on the right side of history and stand with the majority. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. The next comment is from Dan Siebold.
Thank you, everyone. First, I would like to offer a correction to my presentation last week. When sending Mr. Carey the sources I cited, I spotted an error in my interpretation of the data. With that in mind, I wanted to inform all of you that the death rate for flu is only 153% higher than COVID for the 0 to 17 age group, notably less than the 219 figure I cited. I will point out that even when factoring in this correction, the data still proves my point with regards to the ridiculous nature of implementing these rules, as the flu is still significantly more dangerous to our children, and we certainly don't take these kinds of measures with regards to that virus. I would like to apologize to everyone, as I don't want to be a source of misinformation. I proactively corrected my analysis and my message to Mr. Carey, and have no issues admitting when I get something wrong. However, after reviewing your prepared presentation, Mr. Carey, it appears you can't. It appears evident that you did not consider the information I submitted with regards to the ineffectiveness of cloth masks in your updated COVID mitigation plan. At this point, it is a poorly kept secret that cloth masks are ineffective. I have even seen the resident medical analyst on CNN, Dr. Leanne Wen, admit as much. Just back in December, she referred to cloth masks as, and I quote, nothing more than facial decoration. But I feel the people have been beaten over the head with talk about masks for the past 2 years that they are unwilling to evaluate any evidence that might change their opinion. No one will accept the truth right in front of them anymore. Moving on, I would like to highlight some additional information for you all to consider. Again, this is all from the CDC. I reviewed their write-up on in-person attendance in schools and wanted to highlight just a few items for the sake of time. First, a study of factors associated with SARS-CoV-2 infections among children and adolescents in Mississippi found that school attendance was not associated with a positive test result. However, close contacts with persons with COVID, attending gatherings, and having visitors in the home were associated with SARS-CoV-2 infections among children and adolescents. The CDC concluded the evidence to date suggests that staff-to-student and student-to-student transmission are not the primary means of exposure among infected children. Several studies have also concluded that students are not the primary source of exposure among adults in school settings. There were also a number of other studies cited that showed that there was no discernible difference between the spread of COVID in schools versus community spread. Specifically, a study conducted in Michigan and Washington State found that the delivery of in-person instruction was not associated with increased spread of SARS-CoV-2 in schools when community transmission was low. But cases in schools did increase when the surrounding community saw moderate to high levels of transmission. When community transmission was low, there was no association between in-person learning and community spread. Now, explain to me how we can be lifting protective measures in nearly all other aspects of our community in 2 weeks, yet still subject our kids to wear these masks when, again, based on the CDC published data, community spread is either a higher risk factor than school spread or not discernibly different. I certainly can't make sense of it after reviewing the data published by the CDC and then applying it to our real-life scenario. I would hope all of you think long and hard before you make a decision on this, because if we are going to stay true to the science, factoring in what I have just said here tonight, coupled with my statements last week, I don't see how any one of you could reasonably justify continuing to mask our kids in school while the rest of our community opens back up to normal. Last, I would just like to highlight my general disappointment. Disappointment, first off, in myself for not getting the courage to come up here and present these findings to you sooner. Disappointment in our state for using our kids as pawns in what has oddly become a political fight instead of a fair evaluation of the science. And disappointment in every one of you up here for not even considering a reevaluation of the mask policy until your hand was forced. We have all failed these kids, and we need to do better if we want to continue to thrive together as a community. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. The next comment is from Dr. Adina Hoover.
Hello, I'm Dr. Adina Hoover. I'm the mother of 3 in this district. I'm going to start with a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. as to explain the reason that I'm speaking today. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. I'm here to make a personal public statement regarding previous comments given at the CUSD 201 school board meeting on February 8, 2022. I was personally offended and angered by Ms. Julie Williams' comments surrounding slavery and masks. Her words were, and I quote, "If you remember history, slaves wore masks, and we have been coerced to wear slave masks." Now let me make this clear. My outrage has nothing to do with the opinion that masks should or should not be worn in schools. My disappointment and disgust is as a result of using this vile institution of slavery to merely make an argument, to make a point. And what's disappointing is that, unfortunately, there are many other people who don't see that there is a problem in making this comparison. My children saw that there was something wrong with making this comparison. They asked me when they heard this, "Mommy, do they not know history? Is she confusing mask with chains?" I'll share what I told them. I told my children that they themselves were correct. People say things like this, don't know that these types of statements belittle the anguish and suffering of our ancestors. It disrespects what our great-great-great-great-grandparents had to go through to survive, to persevere. Do you think their experience as a slave could be summed up with the experience of wearing a cloth or surgical mask? I'm here today, a descendant of slaves, to answer my children and other students and to say that others may not know their history, but you should. Read as many books as you can to understand how repulsive slavery was as compared to wearing a mask. Understand that human beings were prohibited from learning to read or write. Understand that mothers and fathers had their children ripped from their arms and sold as if they were produce. Understand that women were sexually abused. Understand that people were killed because they wanted freedom. Understand so that the proper respect and acknowledgement is given and history does not repeat itself. Lastly, I personally want to commend every one of these board members, Kevin Carey, and District 201 staff for their stamina, commitment, and dedication to the students of this community. Several speakers have attacked your intentions and rationale for the decisions that you made, claiming that it's personal. I will say this, and it should come as no surprise, that I do take the endeavor of promoting the health of children personally. I stepped up, like others have, to ensure that we follow our mission to educate and empower students to be academically prepared and socially responsible. Thank you. I encourage others to join us, to not just criticize, to do the work necessary to find solutions that uplift our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hoover. Ray Fitch is our next public comment.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Hoover. I can't go anywhere with this without thanking you for that input. And on a lighter note, I'm not dressed up because I got a day off today. Thank you. So I am presenting to you all an anonymous gift, so appreciative of all you've done and all the stress and effort and time that you put into your positions. So this anonymous gift says, thanks for putting your booty on the line for going the extra mile and for diving in for the students, staff, and schools. Hopefully these treats remind you of our appreciation for your time tonight. Thank you. I will leave this here.
Thank you, Rayanne.
Thank you. Welcome.
We have Stephen Fleck next.
Stephen Fleck. So I spoke last week, and a lot's changed in that meeting to this meeting. Nothing's changed with the mask, though. You know, we seem to be still waiting as Westmont 201 to see what the rest of the world is going to do all the time. I gravely ask on behalf of all these people that showed up tonight, and probably would have been more without the snow, but you guys have been thrown into a whirlwind tour, and we get that. And we do appreciate it, because I don't have the time, nor would I want to be sitting where you're sitting. However, they say follow the science. I'm sorry, I can't believe the science. I believe that COVID's a real thing. I believe it's a virus. It's a form of a flu. It will have different strains. They're proving that these strains are changing things. And I also find it funny when you say follow the science, maybe we should put political in there, the political science. Because this truly, and J.B. Pritzker is proving it. I don't understand if you want to follow science. If you had a water leak or a plumbing leak or a gas leak in your house, why would you sit there and say, we have a problem in the house, but we're going to put the water main or the gas main shut off 8 days from now? That's what he's done through this entire thing with masks. Every time we've had a mask mandate. This is J.B. Pritzker. I'm the healthiest guy alive, and I'm going to tell you how to live. We've got a problem, and in 7 days, I'm going to implement masks. If it's such a dire crisis, why wouldn't it start right away? Why wouldn't you run down and turn off your water main? Why wouldn't you turn off your gas? And follow the science. What does JB know that on the 28th you can go anywhere again other than a school? Like, they're only going to get sick in school. I'm not going to throw out the numbers. I don't have time to research the numbers, and frankly, half the numbers aren't real. Some people that they said died of COVID, and I know people that were labeled they died of COVID, but you could jump out of an airplane. If you tested positive for COVID, you were labeled a COVID death. The numbers are so inflated. But magically, in a political year, once again, JB's just suddenly lifting this, lifting that. He's trashing judges. He's doing his thing. I deplore any of you tonight, one of these board members finally have the courage and say, let's vote. What do the people want? This is not your school district. You stood up. You don't own it. It's not a private school. The public has a say. Since we've been here, we're now over, I think, 400 schools in the state of Illinois. Surrounding towns around us are lifting them. I think it was Lockport tonight. Even their superintendent said, we're lifting it. And even if JB puts it back in place, we're not going to. We're going to look at our numbers around us. But, folks, these things don't work. California, the land that's always been crazy about this, they just lifted it all for the Super Bowl. I'm sorry, but Westmont School District 201 is not going to save the world. Let our kids be kids. Let them go to school and let the parents decide. There are parents there that will say, you're still going to wear a mask, and their kids will respect it. But put the option back on this side of the floor. Thank you.
George Wilson is next. Thank you, Stephen.
But we have 14 seconds left on this particular topic of masking.
Okay, George, I called you up, but we have 14 seconds left. So why don't you go ahead and we'll give you 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Okay, I'll go as fast as I can. Good evening. The hardest part of 2 weeks to flatten the curve is definitely the first 2 years. And here we are 2 years in. My country of birth, England, no mask mandates in school. Sweden, no mask mandates in school. All the surrounding states have dropped their statewide mask mandates. The majority of school districts in Illinois no longer have mask mandates in schools. How are the kids doing without masks? Just fine. I was watching the Super Bowl the other day with my 10-year-old. He asked me why you are forcing him to wear a mask in school. Out of the mouths of babes, oft times come gems, as the saying goes. I was watching a football game. My son was watching 70,000 people have a Super Bowl party without a mask in sight and no social distancing. Next day, of course, the kids in California would be wearing masks at school, just like many kids in Illinois. I told my son that when things in life don't make sense, follow the money. It was a good learning moment, because this is what it is all about, money, and specifically ESSA grants. I understand that District 201 has taken almost $2 million in ESSA funds, and for $2 million you have put the ESSA rules and mandates first and our children second. I can understand that you wanted the money, but I cannot understand why you have put mandates before education. It is time to take off the masks, stop mandating, get back to educating. Members of the board, Mr. Carey, you are required to take an oath to serve, the first line of which declares, I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of the Board of Education in accordance with the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Illinois, and the laws of the State of Illinois. You broke this oath when you ignored the judgment from Sangamon County. I could read the rest of the oaths and go into detail how you have broken them, but time is limited. You know that you cannot mask our children without due process. They have not had due process. We are the school board. Not you 9 people, all of us.
That's 2 minutes.
Okay.
We empower you, and we
up.
expect you to represent the whole community, and you are failing to represent us.
Your time is up, sir. You need
Okay.
to step away from the podium. And I appreciate everybody coming out. You're welcome to stay for the meeting, but public comment has concluded.
There's something wrong with a sitting board member coming out and having a rebuttal from last week's meeting and taking away the time when other people
That does not take away the time.
It sure did.
It was not, that comment, please verify, please verify, Jess.
Yeah,
the mask mandate, Adina's was not included in the mask mandate timeframe.
And I am a citizen of this community and have a right to speak.
Public comment is 30 minutes, and I timed the mask comments for 20 minutes.
The mask
did not include Adina's comments, nor did it Dr. Hoover's comments, nor did it include the ones right after that. So it did not take away from anybody's comments on the masks. I can assure you of that.
Yeah, so there was 20 minutes on the mask conversation without Dr. Hoover. And so just make sure everybody understands that. I understand that the live stream sound is not working right now.
It only went out when people opposed the mask.
Oh, come on.
So you know.
It's fixed now.
Whatever was opposed to the mask, the live feed was cut off.
We don't control that.
Not true.
Sound should be working now.
All right, the next item on the agenda is discussion and information.
Do we have our time back since the sound was cut off?
No.
The next item on the agenda is discussion and information. Mr. Carey.
Do we want to take a 5 to make sure that we're back on, or?
They said it should be out.
They said it's back up.
It's still recorded, correct? It's still on the file.
It's still recorded, and anyone who wants to watch the meeting can see the meeting in the recording with sound.
We should be poor. I'm tired of this.
Okay, for this evening, we're presenting an updated mitigation plan. And to kind of just remind the board that it was our August 3rd school board meeting where the board approved our school opening plan, and included in there were our mitigations. And at that time, again, we adopted our guiding principles, and that's something that we have been consistent throughout the entire year, our guiding principles. Our focus has always been the health and safety of our students and staff, and then also to make sure that we remain in person, full-time in-person learning, and we've been able to achieve those things. When we had our school opening plan, we discussed that we wanted to return to full in-person instruction, that there would not be a remote option. Students who had medical reasons, certified medical reasons, we would work through either our IEP plan or 504 plans to accommodate those. We could have 3 feet physical distancing. We would have our cleaning and disinfection protocols, and our close contacts were measured by less than 3 feet for 15 minutes, and we would encourage vaccination. We asked our parents to monitor their children. We didn't have them, checking off that their children were symptom-free, but rather they would monitor their children. And vaccinated students who were asymptomatic did not need to quarantine if they were a close contact, and unvaccinated students would be required to quarantine. We had our mask mandate, which was required on buses and school vehicles for all students and adults indoors, outdoors, no, and then also our visitors. And we were talking about metrics to determine when we would possibly release the mandate. And at that time, why did we have our mask mandate in place? And that was because DuPage County was at a substantial level of transmission. At that time was the Delta variant, which was 1,200 times more viral. And as a school community, we agreed that no level of pediatric death was acceptable, and that even though children and adolescents could be asymptomatic, they were efficient spreaders of the virus. And so some of the initial metrics that we never really, officially settled on, but every so often we'd have that conversation at board meetings, was again looking at the level of transmission that we had in the community, and then also our vaccination rate, and then also our school positivity rate. And again, the transmission levels are all based upon the CDC. and there are two criteria. They look at the positivity rate, and then also the number of new cases per 100,000 were what they focus on. So what has changed that brings us to this evening? Well, for one thing, the vaccination is available for children as young as 5 years old. We have 93% of our staff is currently vaccinated. 20% of our students are vaccinated. Again, that's a low estimate because that's self-reported. We currently have a weekly COVID-19 testing program that is available. It's not mandated, it's voluntary. We have our circuit court case that occurred in Sangamon County, and then we have the JCAR action. The governor has announced that he is going to be relaxing the mask mandate for all entities except schools starting February 28th. And then we're also hearing, conversation that as far as schools are concerned, the governor is looking at sometime in March. Nothing official, but that's what we're hearing through the grapevine. Currently, the mitigations that we have in place to maintain our safe and healthy environment is, again, we have universal masking right now. We have a minimum of 3 feet social distancing in our classrooms, and then during lunch, 3 to 6 feet, depending upon the building. The students are encouraged to frequently wash their hands. We have hand sanitizer available in all of our schools. The optional weekly testing. The unvaccinated close contacts are asked to be excluded for 5 days. And then our higher touch surfaces are cleaned and sanitized at least once a week. Our desktops are sanitized daily. Our cafeteria tables are sanitized after each lunch. We have seating charts for all of our classrooms, K through 5s, to allow us to look at those close contacts. K through 8, they have outdoor mask breaks throughout the day, weather permitting. We encourage outdoor lunch at the junior high and high school, again, when weather is permitting. And then our band program rehearses outside for grades 5 through 12 when weather is permitted. And then, of course, we're continuing to encourage our students to get vaccinated, and the district has hosted several vaccination clinics. As far as the DuPage County Health Department, I did have a conversation with the DuPage County Health Department and asked them to kind of, where they're going and what they see happening. And they anticipate that we'll get updated guidance from the CDC and the IDPH, but they couldn't give a specific timeline. They did put together strategies for schools, which there is a link that you can look at those. And again, it's not anything that gives concrete direction to schools. It's guidance. Again, they look at the transmission level, and currently county still has a high level of transmission, and so that's what they focus on. I asked if we were to go to optional masks, that would require us to go back to 6 feet social distancing, because in some of our schools, 6 feet, we would not be able to accommodate all the students in a classroom. But DuPage County Health Department said, no, that would not be a requirement. But just be aware that, again, the CDC still says that when students are unmasked, then 6 feet is what's considered close contact, less than 6 feet. So they said you can anticipate the number of close contacts increasing, but there's no requirement to go back to 6 feet.
Excuse me.
Kevin, I'm sorry. Kevin, can you pause for 1 second?
Sure.
Since we can't control the noise outside, if you don't mind stepping in and closing the door. I know there are children present too. So
can you step inside and close the door, please, or walk outside? Either one would be fine.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So again, with the 6 feet, we're not required to reduce or to increase it to 6 feet. We can maintain our 3 feet, but just be cognizant of the fact that number of close contacts would probably increase. And then if we had an outbreak when we had mask optional, would the DuPage County Health Department recommend flipping to remote? And the response was no, that would not be the first, intervention. They said definitely they would recommend going back to universal masking, and hopefully then you start to see the positivity rate decrease. If in the event, though, you're continuing to see increased numbers, you could reach a point where that would be required, but that would not be the initial response from our health department.
Kevin, can I just ask a quick question while you're on that slide? Sure. About talking to the health department? What did they say constituted an outbreak?
Right now they're still saying Like two that are connected in the same classroom or on the same team is considered an outbreak.
Just two.
Just two.
Two in one classroom, but what they don't have any statistic for like the school, or does it mirror what they said for the whole community? Like 5% is substantial.
They don't. For schools, it's always been if they can see a connection between the cases. So, if they see 2, 3, 4 cases that they can say yes, those positive cases are due to their interaction with school. Technically, that could be an outbreak.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then in terms of updating the mitigation plan, a couple of assumptions would be that, first of all, that it would be contingent on not having an executive order or a stay in place. That would be the first constraint. And that we consider a phase masking approach to it. That we look at the positive cases in our schools as a primary metric. And then there is a federal mandate on transportation that, one interpretation is that applies to school buses as well. And then new cases and positivity rates continue to decrease in our community and in the county. So what the phase masking approach would look like is that if it's universal masking, that's basically what we have right now, in which masks would be mandated for all students and staff, all visitors, indoors at all time. The next tier would be situational masking, which we would be asking students and staff to wear masks when we could not maintain at least 3 feet of social distancing. Examples of that is, for instance, in a chemistry class, the students are doing a lab. Typically with your lab partner, you're closer than 3 feet, so then masks would be worn. Or if in a classroom setting, a teacher wanted to bring students into the front of the room on carpet squares, they'd be closer than 3 feet, so then masks would be asked to be worn. But the majority of their day, because we're able to maintain 3 feet, the majority of the day, the students would have the option of wearing masks. And then the last tier is recommended masking, where masks would be strongly recommended, but it would be optional whether or not masks are worn. And the metrics that we're looking at is, again, universal masking would occur if we have an executive order in place or there's a stay in place. Then the default would be the universal masking. If those things are not in place, then if the positivity rate is less than 3% in a school, K through 12, for situational masking in our schools K through 12, 1% to 3% positivity rate in the school. And then the recommended masking, if we fall below 1% positivity rate in our schools, then we would have recommended masking. And so kind of what those numbers break down by population, and South is kind of an anomaly. It's an early childhood center. So there, I can tell you quite honestly, it's very difficult to maintain 3 feet social distancing in an early childhood program. And so, we've already had one incident where we had to close the early childhood program just because of, we had several positive cases. So it doesn't take much for South. But you can see then for Miller, their population is 198. So if we have more than 6 positive cases, we would be at universal masking, 3 to 5 positive cases, situational masking, and 2 or less, then masking would be strongly recommended but not required. And you can see for Manning, the numbers would be 12, 5 to 11, and 4 or less. The junior high would be 9 positive cases for universal, 4 to 8 for situational, and then less than 3 for recommended. And for the high school, we'd have 12 cases would be universal, 5 to 11 would be situational, and then less than 4 would be when strongly recommended. To kind of give you an idea of currently, if we looked at February 11th and the number of positive cases we had in each of our schools, South had 2 positive cases, so situational masking would be what the students would be doing. Miller had 0 positive cases, so they would be at, masking would be strongly recommended. Manning had 3 positive cases, so they would have masking strongly recommended. The junior high had 5 positive cases, so they would have situational masking, and then the high school had 2 cases, so masking would be strongly recommended. And so then what happened is, at the end of each week, we'd look at the number of positive cases, see where they fell in terms of that, our range, and then that would determine the following week then what the status would be for that building. And then we would maintain that status for that week and then review it at the end of the week.
So just reiterating that, so it's something that we look at week to week?
Yes.
That possibly change week to week? Okay.
Right, and this would be based upon, we do have the optional testing, but it's not only positive cases as a result of the testing, but it would also be positive cases that report to the school, either through the health department or from the family. So that's typically how we find out our positive cases. So then the recommendation, again, with the following understanding, this is a very fluid situation. We've seen the virus. If you asked me in June where we would have been in August, I would have said we would have been mask optional in June. And then the numbers really started to climb, and we started the year with the mask mandate. And so, it's always changing. There would have to be the absence of the executive order or stay in place. There'd have to be the acknowledgement that schools do have local control. And then our COVID numbers will continue to trend downward. And then we're able to keep our other mitigations in place. That was one of the things that the DuPage County Health Department talked about, was the fact that, trying to, you peel back a mitigation, you see the impact before you start to peel back other mitigations. So you don't want to move too quickly. You want to make sure that the environment stays safe and healthy for our students. And so essentially, the recommendation would be that effective February 28th, and again, 201 will follow the federal and state laws, including enforceable executive orders as required. If the school district has local control, the maximum requirements will be determined by each school's weekly positivity rate. And we'll keep all other mitigations in place, including exclusion of unvaccinated close contacts, masking and return to school from days 6 to 10 after a positive case, and then exclusion from the athletic participation after a positive case. And then we still require masks on our buses. And the reason for the February 28th is because it does align with what is happening in the state in which the mask mandate is lifted for, indoor mask mandate is being lifted. But secondly, our buildings, our principals, our teachers are going to need time to work with students and explain what the new routines will be and how this will work so that it's seamless, it's successful. Sometimes, if you have the opportunity to have time to do it well, that would be my recommendation. But again, this is, the recommendation before the board. And if you have any questions or...
Have you ran this by the WTA and the teachers? How do they feel about this?
I ran it by the WTA, and they're, comfortable with it. They said that we may have to, still sit down, maybe with an MOU possibly, or in the case that we might have a teacher whose health is compromised, we might have to work through some individual situations, but they're okay with it.
Okay.
Speaking of teacher health, we haven't talked a lot about kind of the status of staffing in the buildings as it stands right now. I know we've talked about remote quite a bit for if the health department were to say you've got an outbreak and you've got to switch to remote, but how are we sitting with staffing currently, right? With our current mitigations in place, I know that we're low on subs. How's the staffing in the buildings? If we were to end up having more absences, would we be able to take care of it?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer. When we first started to see the spike again, right after the holidays, before the holidays, after the holidays, it was all hands on deck, making sure that we could staff our classrooms because subs are at a premium, teaching assistants are at a premium. And so definitely things have improved as those positivity numbers have decreased. So I think right now we have one certified staff member who is quarantined and one TA that is quarantined. So that's definitely better than what we had experienced prior. But again, if we do see an uptick, yes, it will be a challenge because there are not the subs available.
Thank you.
I have a question just about the recommendations, or a few, but with your recommendations, the masking for the return to school, is that for all students vaccinated or
Yes.
unvaccinated? Okay.
Yes.
And also for athletic participation, they wouldn't return until day 11. That's for vaccinated and unvaccinated students?
Right, if they're symptomatic.
Okay.
Right. For a vaccinated student who's not symptomatic, they would not be excluded. It's only if a vaccinated student is symptomatic.
Okay. Just trying to understand that masking. So we could be in a mask optional kind of setting in that week, but for the child that was positive, when they return after the 5 days, if they're asymptomatic, they're still asked to wear a mask.
Right, right. Because even though I think, and you probably know better than I do, but that first 5 days is the highest level that they're contagious, but they're still are contagious for the next 5 days.
And I wanted to ask more about the testing. And so with this kind of protocol in place, is the testing still supposed to be voluntary or optional?
That would be my recommendation. I think mandating it, there's a
problem.
My
question about, I know that.
With the mandating. I
Another
think
argument.
what will happen though, because like when the Omicron variant and we started to see the increase, we really saw an increase in the number of tests. I think if we end up with looking at more of a mask optional, we'll see an increased number of people who will want to be tested.
But that's my concern, is if we don't, I suspect the numbers will continue to go low, just like in June, and you don't have that high number of tests. So I asked, what's your number to look at that rate? If the rate is low, how accurate is that positivity rate we're looking at if no one's being tested? Not no one, but a minimal number. So that's why I asked that.
And that's, but again, the tests through North Shore, that's one source.
Okay.
It's also as students are testing positive in the community, and that's reported. And sometimes it's through the health department, sometimes it's through the family.
Okay.
Question on the North Shore. There's been no issues when North Shore themselves is coming out to do the testing, as opposed to where all these buildings are opening up and using North Shore?
No, we've had no problem with them being there when they say they will. As a matter of fact, they're very accommodating. Monday's a holiday. They're coming in Tuesday. Normally Monday's our test day. They moved it to Tuesday. When they were having a large number of tests, typically within 24 hours, we know the results. When there was a large number of tests, there was a little bit of a lag. But overall, it's been pretty positive working with them.
Something else which has been brought up, and we haven't touched on through this whole time, was ventilation was an issue that was brought up in the beginning of all this in the pandemic. Has there been any more discussion through local health department, all that, and how do we stand with that?
Ventilation, if you look at junior high, the high school, and south, they have HVAC systems that pull in fresh air. So that's the best scenario. And south, even though the age of the building is because in 2011, I think it was, we did some significant changes to south. That's when we moved the district office there. And so that's when the HVAC system was addressed. Miller and Manning still have hot water heat, so they don't have that type of an HVAC system that pulls in outdoor air. So for Manning and Miller, It's either the window units, you can run the fan on the window units, or open a window. But it doesn't have the same HVAC system. That those buildings do not have the same HVAC system.
And just per a previous PTO meeting when parents had discussed about getting air filter or air purifiers into the classroom, is that still something, an option they can talk about to fundraise for that, just as a future thought?
Right. I mean, that's definitely can have the conversation. I'd want to defer to Joe Smith, our Director of Building and Grounds. I know he's, just like superintendents in the county talk, during the pandemic, the directors of Building and Grounds, everybody's looking for that portable system that you can put into a building that could simulate a more modern HVAC system. And nobody's really has locked in on that.
Okay.
So before we charged the PTA or PTO with that, I would want to talk to Joe and see if, what his recommendation would be.
All right. Beyond that, situational masking. I mean, I like the idea that if the close contacts come in that. I have a fear because these students are emulating what their parents are doing at home and speaking, that it's going to be even more difficult than them keeping their masks over their nose in the building. If it comes to situational masking, I think we need to really stress that they have to have extra masks with them and not fishing nets. I've seen fishing net masks, like they're clear as day, I can see faces. That kind of defeats the purpose, and it's kind of might be why we're still getting COVID while masking. But I think it just really needs to be, if situational masking is something that you guys are comfortable with and the recommendations, and we do approve something like that, I think it needs to be stressed that these kids still need to have their masks on them.
I have a question to follow up with. Is that something where, I think someone gave the example of in a lab they're supplied safety goggles. Is this something the school will supply? Again,
Right
if we're in
now,
a setting that's optional, they don't have it with them.
Right. We do have masks, yes. That if a student did not have a mask, we can supply a student with a mask. We've been doing that throughout the pandemic. And we have both the cloth masks and also the surgical masks that we can give students. And so that's what I would envision, Angie, is that each teacher would have masks so that in the event it's an activity where students need masks and students don't have masks, they would have masks for the students.
Okay. That was going to be my follow-up, was can we get to a spot with the amount of masks that we have in our buildings that like each teacher can have, a box of age-appropriate masks in their building for those students who either don't have a mask for whatever reason that may be, or their mask is dirty or, any of those things. So can we get to that spot, or are we at that spot already with the amount that we have?
We're at that spot. We're pretty flush with masks right now.
Kevin, you said the cloth mask, though, and really research is showing that the cloth masks are not very effective, so that doesn't really seem effective. And I hear what everybody's saying, and I'm sensing a little bit of nervousness about the situational masking. I have a tremendous amount of nervousness about that particular situation. I feel like you used the analogy, was it just last week, about putting toothpaste back in a tube. So like 1 week we're recommended masking. You can do whatever you want, even if we're in a large assembly, correct? If it's recommended, even if we're in a big assembly, choice.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. Next week, though, we move to situational. So I'm doing a lab. I'm a kid, and I'm like, well, no, okay, I'll back up. So I'm 3 feet away. And now I'm giving my teacher a hard time. And I just think the amount of, we're getting in the weeds here. We're making it way more complicated than it needs to be, especially given all of the recent data about COVID and about it. I mean, this is not... the particular strain that we have now is not nearly as dangerous as it was. We have a vaccine that's available that's preventing death and preventing hospitalization. I mean, and I, believe me, I support mitigations. I work in a school. I was wearing a KN95 back in January when this was really rampant, and that was my choice. And now I wear, a different kind of mask. So I don't want to come across as an anti-masker. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination. But I just think, I think that we're not thinking about this logically right now, in any way, shape, or form. And so I would just challenge us to think a little bit more about some of the actual data that's out there, and not just the hypothetical data of, well, and I get it, and this is going to sound, I'm going to sound like a monster, like the grandma or the I have immunocompromised people in my family, and my dad was in the hospital with COVID. So we all have those stories. It's possible. Thank God he's vaccinated. I truly believe that saved his life. But we can't ignore all of these kids who are having speech delays, developmental delays, social problems. I mean, I would like us to pause here. If we're going to make a move on masks, I think situational's too messy. I think it puts teachers in a terrible position. I'm in a classroom, and if I had to police that on a daily basis, especially when there's so much divisiveness about it, I mean, that's going to be something that this district will have to take on, dealing with the back and forth. You can be optional this week, you have to wear it here, you have to wear it here, but not here. You're too close to this person, put your mask on. That's going to take away from quality learning in the classroom if I'm constantly having to watch how close people are and then adjust. So, I mean, I would potentially be in favor of, like, we move to recommended, like everybody's doing right now, and we haven't seen huge outbreaks in schools. And then maybe we have a higher threshold for universal. I'm not saying we get rid of universal masking by any means, because I do truly believe that as we say, it is a fluid situation. If there's another strain that is deadly again.
How do you move to recommended and say, it seems like those two statements, and I truly want to understand this, it seems like the statement of moving to recommended and not getting rid of universal does not make sense.
So it does, because right now we can be mask optional. And let's say there's a new strain of COVID that develops that is more like the initial strain of COVID that is very deadly, and despite the vaccine, people are dying, or kids are getting it at much higher rates than they're getting it now and getting much more sick. But so like maybe it's like 10%, or like, okay, this is, again, I don't like using anecdotal stuff, but like several years ago, we shut down our school for 2 days because over 100 kids had the flu. That's a big number. 6 kids, though, are we going to shut down if 6 kids have strep throat, or 6 kids
it's
have...
It's not the same thing. We have to stop using strep
throat. Or the flu, or something else, or pneumonia. If 6 kids had pneumonia.
This is a pandemic. We never had a strep pandemic. We had a flu pandemic where it caused us to pause, and not to this degree. Is not the same. I wanted to say that.
You're right. That's a red herring. Totally agree.
And so I understand what you're saying. I agree with like the back and forth week to week. That gives me pause and concern too. But I'm just bringing this back to this notion that Omicron wasn't bad. With Omicron, we saw higher numbers of kids getting sick. And it's not just death that we're dealing with. We're dealing with autoimmune problems from kids. So I hear a kid that comes in and has an issue with fevers, they can't breathe. They had COVID 3 weeks ago, and they were fine and thought they got over it. We're seeing many kids come back. So we can't just deal with death. It's not just the death number that everybody wants to spout, like, oh, kids are not dying. Well, they still have to live with these conditions. Their parents are having strokes or heart attack at an age that they should not be having, because it is related to COVID. So that's why we were doing this, and that's why we have to give caution. So I just want to remind people that we have to give caution to say, not just because kids are not dying, they're dealing with other illnesses that we saw recently from this variant, and we don't know what's to come. And that's the big problem of how much are we going to accept and say, oh, it's just that kid that has this autoimmune problem, that has cardiac problems now that he has. That's that one, and here's that one. We have to keep that in mind as we discuss this. And like I said, I get this is messy and it's hard to say, when do we say mask optional? When are we at that point, like we were in June, almost, just that we can take a breather and take a break from wearing this mask. But we just need to be careful as we say that, and how we.
I hear you on that 100%. And yet, like, unless I had in front of me, like, here's the huge percentage of kids that are experiencing this autoimmune disorder after getting COVID. Like, we don't have that, and I'm not sure that we ever will, and I don't understand why we're waiting for it. And in the meantime, having these, not giving the choice to families, especially when, if I'm a family that's super nervous, my kids are vaccinated, and I'm sending my kid in a KN95 mask to school, not a cloth mask probably, because that's going to offer the most protection. I'm not trying, believe me, like I said, I've been very cautious during this pandemic. I'm not a COVID denier. I'm not an anti-masker. None of the above. It is serious.
There are people that are. You are a great example of what we're supposed to do. But there are people that are not.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question real quick, Jess? Because I'm a little confused. We're talking about a plan that Superintendent Carey and the administration have put in front of us that involves 3 phases.
Yes.
One is mask required. Another is mask recommended. And the middle ground is situational masking. Is your position that we should do away with the situational masking phase and only have 2 phases, one being required and one being strongly recommended?
That's one of my suggestions.
And so if it's just one, what's the other or the others?
The other is to reconsider the metrics that we're using. I think that 3% is that what it was? 3% positivity rate?
Yes.
Universal masking,
3%.
that feels incredibly low to me. I think that should be higher.
Okay.
I mean, if we look at, can we go back to the slide that has the CDC transmission levels on it? The one that we've been looking at for the past couple of years? That one. So these are positivity rates, correct?
Correct.
So low transmission is less than 5%, and yet we're saying universal masking at 3%. Like, I would say universal masking is when we're at high transmission, or even substantial would be more palatable to me at the 8 to 9. What would those numbers look like? I mean, this is not practical. They're going to be in universal masks.
Right, just quick mental math. For the high school, there are almost 400 kids. So 8% of that would be...
8 times 4, 32.
32. And so between 32 and 36.
32 and 36.
Right, students in the building.
Okay, so what about 5%?
5% would be 20.
So before we go there, one of the big things that we said is, what is the recommendation coming from health officials, the public health officials? Like, we can sit here and kind of barter, how about 5, give me 2. That is not my job. We've said that time and time again. I don't have the degrees that go into looking at this. And for a virus that's different than strep and different than influenza, that the contractibility of it is different. That's why you have these numbers. Right. That's why you look at the lower numbers. But what's being recommended?
Yeah, just real quick, because I have a couple of questions for Kevin, but I just wanted to make sure that I personally understood what your position or positions are on these 2 subjects. With regards to the percentage of positivity rate that we should be targeting for deciding or determining when we move through phases, I would only just say that getting to high transmission, it's too late. The goal is not to react when you're in high transmission. I think that whatever bar we set, whatever bar, we don't set it actually, whatever bar the administration recommends and we approve or don't approve, should be substantially lower than high transmission and probably substantial transmission as well. Because we're trying to keep from getting to those places. Once we're in those places, it's too late. So
that's where a 5% might be more.
Sure. I don't know what the right percentage is. Maybe it's between 3 and 5%. I don't know.
Well, I would like to get back to Adina's question also, because Adina asked the question of what is the DuPage County Health Department recommending, and then I'd also like to add to that, Mr. Carey, how did you land on the percentages that you're recommending?
Sure. So first, in terms of DuPage County Health Department, again, they're not going to recommend. What they would say is that actually you should look at the high level of transmission, substantial, moderate, low, based upon the county and local community. Because, you know, what they say time and time again is the virus doesn't respect, you know, towns. You know, it doesn't respect a school. It, you know, people travel all over the place. So it's you know, while they see why schools want to focus on what's happening in their district and in their buildings, they understand that they would prefer that it's a little bit broader than just a school, and that it would be about the moderate level when you would consider mask optional. You know, that's when it's, to get to Carlos's point, if you're looking at substantial, you know, and you go to universal masking, that may be too reactionary, and those numbers are just going to keep climbing. So they would say more that moderate level would be where they would be comfortable looking at peeling back mitigations.
But let's be clear, they're not giving us numbers.
No.
They're
No,
telling
they're
us, figure it out.
Yeah. We can't keep waiting for them either.
No, I understand that.
There's-
I'm not stoked about them not helping us at all, because they're not helping us. They're not helping our communities. They're truly not, because the health departments are the experts and we are not. We are volunteers who stepped up, many of us, well, actually almost all of us, after COVID started, to support the school district and to try to help the school district through this. And we are not medical experts, with the exception of the one doctor that we are lucky enough to have on our school board. But they're not going to help us. And so they are forcing us to figure this out. And we do need to forge a path forward.
That's right.
We have to. Because if there is anything, well, there is clearly some misunderstanding around what majority means.
Absolutely.
Okay? And what is in the room and what comes to us via our email, you know, and what we hear from the community that does not feel comfortable coming out to these meetings for whatever their personal reasons may be. Because there are lots of ways for us to listen. Everybody wants to move forward in some way or another. So we're not going to get that information from the CDC or from the DuPage County Health Department. We have said over the course of these last 2 years plus, very consistently, let's follow the CDC guidance. Let's follow the guidance that's out there. So I understand these percentages that are out there and that piece around low, moderate, substantial, and high transmission.
And that's my point. So, like, we've followed what guidance they've given us. Not saying wait.
This is all that we have. This is all that we have. With that said, it looks like we are looking at percentages only for students that are enrolled, and those are not the only people that are in our building. So can I ask, how do the teachers play into these numbers? And is that part of, because when I see a lower percentage, if we're just looking off of student enrollment, and it's a 3%, and then it's universal masking, or whatever that may be, and we're not taking into account teachers that are excluded or have tested positive, that makes a little bit more sense to me. But I also want to understand, because even though not all of our teachers live in our community, they all work in our community every day. So help me understand why the teachers are not part of our overall number in the buildings every day, and kind of that thought process. So did we think about that? Is there a reason that we're only looking at it, student enrollment? Help me understand that.
We're focusing on the students because of a high vaccination rate of our staff. You know, granted, you can still have a breakthrough case, but we're over 92% of our staff is vaccinated. So that's why the focus is in terms of the numbers and when we would view universal. But the staff would respond the same way, though. If the building is universal, regardless of the vaccination status of the staff, they're masked as well.
Yeah, no, I think my point is, it's either we're talking about all the people in our buildings on a daily basis or not. If we're going to talk about percents, because percents don't lie. right? I got 100 people, 1% is still 1%. I've got 1,000 people, 1% is still 1%, right? So if we're going to talk about it and we're going to have like a percentage meter, then I'm of the opinion that I'd like to see that for everybody that is in our building on a daily basis, not like the OTs that are, that might work for SACID or whatever that may be. But the folks who are in our building, like, what is our total number of people in our building? Does that? I feel like that would help the percent number be more specific for me.
I hear your point. I think I understand what you're saying, though, Kevin, that because of the high percentage of teachers that are vaccinated, the concern is with
the
students who we know the numbers of vaccinated students are relatively moderate at best right now. I did want to get back, though, and maybe I just got distracted because I was frustrated about the health department. Did you answer the question of how you landed on 3%, 1 to 3?
The percents, quite honestly, I mean, we did basically the same exercise that the board is doing. Okay, take a look at what the health department has as their percentages, and then take a look at your enrollment within your building. And so when you start to look at that 5 to 8%, and again, if we're just round numbers, 400, when you look at that 5 to 8%, that's, 20 to 32 kids. And honestly, the principals, they were thinking that's a lot of kids working through the building that are positive. And that they're concerned that how quickly then would that lead to even more positive cases. And so that's why we kind of took a look at the 3%, and then we looked at that February 11th data. And so that February 11th data, we didn't have any of our buildings that were universal masking, and based upon where the board wants to go, we may be just, mask recommended, universal, and there isn't and if that was the case, then we would probably have all of our buildings would be mask recommended at that point.
I think what's so tricky about also working with numbers now, and this is going to get trickier after the 28th, is that this number of kids walking around with COVID in the school building is also now in the grocery store unmasked, or at a concert unmasked, or all of these other zillions of places. We can't. So I guess I am struggling to understand why. Like, I get that you have to go to school. It's not a choice to go there. So there's that piece. But like, I can't understand the rationale for masking at school if you can't even prove that they're getting it at school. They could be getting it literally everywhere else that they go, especially after February 28th, when masks aren't going to be required anywhere.
But I think it goes back to the transmission. I mean, if they have it in school, we had some students come and speak tonight about, them wanting to feel safe in their school. And if people are out not masked everywhere else, that's where it's going to be, the transmission in school.
And
like, that's our job, to protect them when they go into the schools.
And there's a difference between the grocery store, where if we look at numbers, the number of unvaccinated kids altogether, the grocery store doesn't have 200 kids all present at once. Right. In the school, you have a high number, and I look at that vaccinated number as low. So you have a high population of unvaccinated people, children, together at one point. They're not at the concert or at the grocery store. You have mostly adults and some kids that, you can weigh what you're going to do. But in that school, that is the reason why they have that. This is a high population of unvaccinated children that can be affected, not even talking about if they're passing it to each other. That possibility can be there if there are a high number of positive kids without masks. And that's what we're talking about, prevention also. So that's why there's a difference in the community.
I was going to basically say the same thing. At an elementary school, you have 20-some students in the same room for, close to 7 hours a day. So they're all together, and then there's mixing some, at lunch and so forth. Your junior high and high school, you have, groups of students every class period, they're mixing, but they're in that room for the 45, 50 minutes. That doesn't happen in a lot of other environments. And so schools are a little bit different. And then as far as, you're right, a lot of times you can't trace how that student became positive. And that's why the health department says, don't look at your building, look at what your community spread is, and that would be more telling.
I have a question about that, because we're looking at our building with our building positivity rate and not the community. Why are we not looking at the community rate to use as the metric?
Until now, when there's been a spike necessarily in the community, we haven't necessarily seen it in the schools to the same degree. And so that's why we kind of were thinking more in terms of what's happening within our building. But to Jess's point, as the mask mandates lifted for, businesses and other public places, it might be wiser to take a look at what's going on in the community versus what's going on in just the building.
Back on to what Adina was stating and the masking, I don't think the kids are getting it in the school. And I think because we've had the mask in place, I'm pretty sure a lot of these families that are anti-mask, they're not properly wearing them out in public. I work with the public, and I see it all the time. Everywhere, nobody's properly wearing the masks at all times. I have not gotten COVID this whole 2.5 years. My husband has. We have not. Me and the family have not. It's happening beyond the buildings, and I think with our mask mitigation, it has curbed it, where we're not passing it to each other. And on the vaccination rate, I know that the public health department believes 70% is herd immunity. We will never reach that in the school. We will never reach that number in the school. And that's just safety. Science is a lot to take in, and especially at this level, and we're watching it unfold in front of us. We've only read about pandemics in history. We're watching this unfold. We don't know how to react to it. So we're watching this, and people are cautious. People are cautious previous to a pandemic on vaccinating their children. So I don't believe we're ever going to reach a 70% there. So all these other mitigations kind of need to fall into place for us to stay there. And I just don't like having that still 70%. Like I love that the teachers are all vaccinated. That's fantastic. They're taking themselves into care and the rest of their community into care. But always seeing those numbers with the kids really bothers me, because parents, no matter where you stand on any of this, a lot of people are very cautious with that. So
Kevin, just the recommendation, I mean, you all are recommending the situational masking and by building. And so I guess what I want to understand is, I think some fair concerns have been expressed about situational masking and the strain it puts on the building. I also think, we have to really consider the strain that puts on the community in terms of where are we this week? What's happening? I think, a lot of concerns have been expressed throughout my whole tenure on the board, really about communication and making sure we're on top of communication. I think situational masking presents a lot of challenges in terms of communication as well. How did you and the administration really land on feeling comfortable that you could execute situational masking, and specifically, in the buildings, and also communicating in a timely fashion to parents so that they would understand what's happening, that week and the next week, et cetera?
Right, and some of that, the reason for the recommendation is February 28th is to get, some of those pieces in place, because it's going to take working with the staff and working through their concerns, and then working with our students. Maybe the transition isn't as quick, but we do have other times where students are expected to do something different, because of either what's transpiring in the class or the class that it is. And so it's a matter of, the vast majority of our students, if the teacher indicates, okay, this is what you need to do today, the students respond, and they do it that way. So will it be easy? No. Will there be some challenges? And again, if it's not working, then it probably needs to be tweaked then, but I think definitely there'll be some challenges, but in terms of, just so that as an administrative team, whatever the board decides, we will follow through and we will implement, and there's, no concern that we will not do it, So if there is a hesitation, and I understand it, with the situational masking, and that's something that the board would like to see taken out, then that's something that we can do.
I don't I don't know that I look, Kevin, you guys have thought about this. You guys have, like so many other things, you've put this plan together. I mean, I have two questions that I want to ask you at the end of something that I want to say real quick here. We've been told that we're not listening. We've been told that we don't have the guts to make decisions. When everyone around us is doing one thing, we don't have the guts to do something else that's right. Then we've been told that everyone else around us is doing something and we need to do what they're doing. We've been told that we haven't listened to the majority. I'm here to tell you that the majority, independent of how we decide and how you move forward, has told us that they support us. And we've heard from enough people to know that no matter what mitigation plan we approve, we will be promptly asked to submit our resignations. It doesn't matter which one we approve. What I see in this plan is an approach that's updated based on what we have learned in the last 6 to 9 months, and it's focused on what's happening specifically in this community. The problem that we all see in this plan is the back and forth and the difficulties that it's going to present, and the situational masking. We're probably going to have to go back and forth very frequently and potentially even weekly. We've dealt with challenges of implementing our mitigation plans for 2+ years. And we will deal with the challenges of situational masking, and we'll deal with the challenges of going back and forth, just like we've dealt with all the other challenges. All plans require good faith implementation by all the people involved. So if you can be a part of the solution, be a part of the solution. And if you can act in good faith and not, oh, I don't understand, I don't know what's happening this week, I don't know what's going on, that's obstruction is what that is. That is sabotage is what that is. So I get that there can be confusion from time to time, but I also think that if everyone in the community is acting in good faith, then we can implement situational masking and we can implement going back and forth between phases. I believe that Superintendent Carey and this administration have the health and education of every student and staff of CUSD 201 at the center of everything that they do and every decision that they make. So I just have two questions. One, do you believe and does your administration believe that this plan will maintain the health and safety of the students and prioritize full-time in-person learning?
Yes.
And I know that you stated that we're waiting until February 28th to implement this plan, and I think this has something to do with the answer to this next question. But do you and your administration have the resources you need to implement this plan as it's stated?
The resources, in terms of masking, those types of resources, yes. But another resource is time, right? And so definitely there needs to be some time for the staff and for teachers to communicate to students. We need that time to do it successfully.
Yeah. So those are my two questions. And if there needs, if that included in that time means tweaking the percentages, or even if it means removing situational masking, whatever it means, but put forth, this is the same thing I always come to you with, Kevin, which is put forth the plan you believe in, and then let us approve it or not approve it. I do not want to get into percentages and myself. I don't.
I don't either, and yet I do think that that is somewhat our job, though, to take recommendations and to discuss them among one another and any concerns and question them. So I don't think it's out of line for us to ask
Make
for the
suggestions to changes, yeah,
situational
for
to
sure.
be reconsidered. And we keep talking about majority too, and I don't know, I'm not seeing a majority. I'm seeing 50-50, as always, as we have for the entire pandemic. 50% of people who want a choice and 50% of people who really, really want masks to be mandated. And there's like a really lonely little number in the middle as well. And I just feel like we've reached a point where we have options for both because we have the availability of a life-saving vaccine. You couldn't get masks before, KN95 or N95. You can get them with ease now, and maybe the school has funds to provide those for people as well, those students who are particularly worried. And Westmont High School, we've talked about this before. I hear you on the changing of classes. That makes things trickier for sure, but we're lucky to be a rather small school. I think you mentioned once the average class size is about 13 or 14 students.
Yeah, that would be the average.
And so, I mean, just compared to some larger districts who are taking this on, we have the ability probably to still have more physical distance in classrooms when there's some students who are masked and some who are not. I just, there's that, and so there's all of those things I just want us to think about that. I really would not be pushing for this if I didn't feel like it was safe. I'm not trying to put anybody in harm's way. I wouldn't be. I really wouldn't. And honestly, I'm not sure I'd be in this position just a couple of months ago. But again, happy to return to the universal masks if and when things change. The other thing we haven't talked about, though, as far as universal masking, is that first bullet point, and this is where I'm afraid we're really going to. I'm so glad that Mr. Galitz is here because I am a little concerned, and I'm not a legal person, about the legality of universal masking. So I just want to be sure that if we're deciding on whether it's 3% or 5% or 7% for universal masking, can we legally do that? Because we don't want to break the law. And so, I'm not sure that we have fully fleshed that out. I'm not sure the state has fully fleshed that out yet. But that's something else that we haven't talked about yet that needs to be considered.
Yeah, it's a great question. And Jeff, can you clarify for us?
I can clarify it as much as it can be clarified. And we sit here tonight, I think a number of you know this, that, let me back up. Everyone is familiar with the Sangamon County TRO that was put in place. It was a number of different cases, but they involved students and employees. I won't give the whole procedural history of it, but we're all aware, obviously, that your district was not a part of that litigation. So that judge issued a ruling that applied to those districts. Now, it is a sizable ruling because there are 170 or so school districts involved in that. And at this point in time, her ruling, that judge's ruling, was that these mitigation measures, specifically masks and excluding close contacts and then employee testing or vaccination, that those were not permissible for the state to impose on school districts. Now, there have been other judges and other opinions at the trial court level, like that one, that have reached opposite conclusions, and some who have reached the same conclusion. The key for us, for this district, since you're not a party to it, is finding out what the appellate court has to say about it, because the appellate court opinion is going to be really the law of the land. It's going to clarify the extent of state authority. And literally that decision should be coming tonight, at any moment. But we don't have it yet. So that leaves, unfortunately, school districts. It has left you in an awkward place for a couple weeks now, but even here today with a bit of uncertainty. There are arguments to say that masking is not a form of quarantine and that you can require it. This particular judge in this case disagreed with that. And so, quite honestly, until we get the clarity from the appellate court, we are left with risk on either way, honestly. If you continue mitigation measures of any variety, whether it's universal masking or some rolled back form of masking, there is risk to that. There's the possibility of challenges. Likewise, if you go to mask optional now and then you, or some variation of that now, and the appellate court ruling says those state mandates are in effect, now you're back in a position where you're not compliant with the executive order that was in place. So unfortunately, that leaves you with risk either way at this moment.
Can you clarify, Jeff? Because we, as a board, made a decision for universal masking pre the governor's mandate.
Right.
So, and can you clarify, because the judge had called something out in her, I think it was footnotes, around that the state mandating was not okay, but that school boards should be able to handle their own districts. So how does that, because I know there were a number, in fact, the vast majority of school districts waited for the governor to make a decision where we did not wait for the governor to make a decision. In fact, I think we had an emergency meeting in order to give our community an answer when everybody else was waiting. So how does that specifically, does that alter that at all? Because it's been my understanding that we have been operating under that decision since that TRO was put in place, because we had already made that decision to do universal masking and had already been, for the last year, on the path of an exit strategy, if you will. So can you help me understand that?
Yeah, so really you're talking about local authority to set your own parameters without regard to a state mandate, right? If there were no state mandate in place, here's the direction you would go. In this particular trial court's opinion, she spoke to the issue of local authority, and she recognized that school boards do have some local authority in conjunction with their health departments. So, when it comes to quarantining folks, that you're going to, they either consent to it or you work with your local health department to go through a process for them to be excluded. The key that the piece that is still hard is what exactly constitutes a quarantine. Is donning a mask a form of quarantine? And it's interesting because ultimately the authority on that is the Illinois Department of Public Health and then the local health departments. And their regulations define what is a quarantine, and they have a definition within those regulations that talks about something called a modified quarantine. And over the course of this past year, that definition has been eliminated for a period of time in September. And now just recently, Mr. Carey referenced the JCAR action just 2 days ago, where those emergency rules were due to be re-upped, and they were blocked. They were suspended by JCAR. And so, as a practical matter, what that means is that old definition of modified quarantine remains in effect. So, although the trial court opinion does not specifically rule on whether local school boards have the authority to put masks on students or require masks on students or not, there's certainly a similar risk that the board would be subjected to of people taking that same argument and applying it to the school district and saying, masks are a form of quarantine and therefore you can't do it unless you go through this process with the health department. Some health departments are actually acting upon those now and issuing quarantine orders, and others are not. So it's somewhat subject to your health department. But again, so your local authority is not directly affected by this Sangamon County ruling, but the logic and analysis behind it is important. And so it's going to make a big difference, I think, what the appellate court has to say about that. Right? If they conclude that wearing a mask is not a form of quarantine, right? Quarantine is when you go home and have to stay away from all society or something. That logic, has relevance for your local authority as well. So, unfortunately, I sit here tonight without a perfect answer for you on that because the appellate court hasn't spoken. But I will tell you, the judge in Sangamon thought that masks and those other measures are a form of quarantine. Other judges have disagreed and ruled otherwise. But again, what the trial court judges think in any given case, while it's relevant, we pay attention to it. In terms of statewide authority, the appellate court is the piece that we're really looking for, and we don't have that as it relates to school mitigation measures yet.
Awesome.
I'm sorry, I know that's
No,
a lot.
it does help.
Right.
That does help.
Just kidding. But it's very confusing. But you clarified it very well, I think, in terms of what you understand right now.
So when you say risk, like our legal risk of a massive lawsuit, parents who are saying that what you're mandating, you can't mandate. That's one risk. And the other risk is if we weren't complying with an executive order would be our other potential risk. But right now, so if we were to suspend or go to recommended right now, and then this appellate court comes out and says that masks are not a form of quarantine, is that when we're at risk for, who?
Sure. Yeah.
Where does the lawsuit come from in that case? I get where the lawsuit comes from, if we're requiring masks and can't based on that case, but where does it come from in the other
scenario?
So
I mean, a lawsuit potentially could come from parents who are wanting masks and aren't getting it, right, if you were to roll it back. But the other piece that is, I think, more relevant, if we all rewind to when we started this year and we were thinking about what are the risks of not abiding by the executive order, the big one that was on everyone's radar was the State Board of Education. It was placing schools on probation and then threatening their recognition status, which has an impact on your funding and so on. So that was happening in a very real way for a number of schools over the fall and into the winter. Obviously, at this moment right now, because of the State Board of Education was a party to that lawsuit, and so they are directly subject to that trial court order right now. So, I mean, they're not taking enforcement action against schools right now. If the state authority to impose these measures is upheld by the appellate court, I don't know whether ISB will resume that process or not, in terms of whether they'll restart enforcement action. There's a possibility of that. I don't know. There's also the possibility, of course, that even if those state mandates are upheld, that they'll be rolled back anyway in a matter of a week or a few weeks or in March or whatever. Certainly people have their opinions on when that will happen, but that's also a possibility, at which point you'll be removed from those, and then that risk of doing what you want is no longer as much of an issue.
And just to clarify,
Thank you for clarifying.
Real quickly, you mentioned funding and the state funding. ESSER funds, which have been brought up multiple times in the last couple of weeks, are federal funds. And those are not something that are going to be taken away if we do or don't follow a state guideline, because those ESSER funds are part of the pandemic relief bill, which is a federal bill.
Not related.
So we're not abiding by a mask mandate in order to retain ESSER funds. No matter, this is not related at all to the ESSER funds that we've received from the federal government.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And just to give a little bit of context to that, your ESSER funds, those, as part of that grant process, you had a school reopening plan at the beginning of the year, and you had whatever mitigation measures were in place. But there's nothing about that grant process and those mitigation measures that you did back at the start of the school year that says forevermore you will be in masks, right? That at a certain point in time, those would roll back depending on your conditions. So I don't think that there's an ESSER concern, and I don't think that you're obligated to stay masked because due to a funding stream.
Right, absolutely. Right. So, guys, I guess I'm feeling like we have explored this pretty comprehensively. If there's more questions, let's certainly have them. But
I just have a statement whenever you're done.
Okay. We have a vote on the agenda regarding the proposal for mitigations that Kevin put in front of us. We have to, as people have said, we have to move forward. I just want to make sure before we go to the vote that we're all ready to vote relative to the mitigations that were put in front of us.
Wait, sorry, when does this start? When would this would go
The
into
recommendation would be the 28th.
And that would be the situational masking to recommended masking.
Right, unless the board can tweak this, right?
Right now?
Yeah,
Or-
and,
okay.
and Jeff can help with the motion if it ends up being tweaked. Or the board can vote on what's presented and the motion. In that case, it would be the three-tier approach starting on February 28th, unless the board wants to, tweak it a little bit.
So I have a bit, I have a statement on that, if you will. Carlos stole my words, as he's done many a time, in a wonderful way. And he reminded me about changing weekly, and it kind of brought me back to some odd years ago, when all of this started and we were having near weekly emergency meetings also. And as we went into the pandemic, things were changing on a weekly basis, and it felt like we were approving plans, and then they were just to change to approved plans. And the majority of this school year has been fairly consistent, thanks to the governor's order, because frankly, we couldn't make any other choice. And I think that our kids have benefited from that, and I think our schools have benefited from that. We are closer to the end of this than we are the beginning of it. And it makes sense to me that the end of it mirrors the beginning to an extent of things changing on a fairly weekly basis. The administration has absolutely come up with a plan that they believe in. And if Kevin and his team has said, we think we can do this, and if it means that next week or the week after situational masking doesn't work, let's drop it, right? We can do that, and we have done that. We have proven to do that repeatedly as we were ramping into this pandemic and then hitting a bit of a pandemic plateau, whatever you would like to call it. But we have done that before, and I believe that we can do that again, and that I have absolutely zero belief that whatever happens today is going to still be true in a week or 2 weeks, because the situation changes so quickly, and we are on the downside of that, right? We are coming out of this to an extent. And so I believe in this plan. I think situational masking it's a hard middle ground. And I think it is going to be challenging for the teachers to do. But I also think that it has a place. I do think about those kids doing chemistry labs around the big black tables that are fireproof, and and having that ability in the classroom. I think it does have a place. I see it from the different schools also. But most importantly, I feel confident in our ability to give direction, in Kevin's ability to give us feedback on how it's working in the field, in the schools, and for us to be able to tweak and adjust as needed, and for our ability to have meetings as needed, right? If we need to have a meeting, come in and talk about something, then we can do that. So I mean, I think that there are questions about the plan, but you're never going to know what the answers are going to be until you start doing it. And I think the most important step that we take is one to move forward, and Carlos said most of that, but he just brought me back to that. And it is very clear that the only thing that is certain is that everyone won't be happy,
Yes.
including every single person at this table. There's not a single person in this district who's going to get 100% of what they want. And that's hard.
Yeah.
And it's really hard. Absolutely nobody's going to get every single thing that we want. The best that we can do is try to move forward. So,
Leah, and you had wanted to make a statement too.
Yeah, just a final statement on this. I mean, I appreciate that the admin came up with this and they chose the situational masking. So ideally, most days will be recommended masking until necessary. And like I said earlier, students are emulating their parents. We just want to see grace and kindness against classmates and the staff, teachers, and the admin if people choose to continue to mask. There have been situations where students make fun of other students because they got vaccinated when they found out. I can see them now. They already hate them. Some of them already hate the mask, not all of them. Some of them hate the masks. Their choice, fine. They're now possibly going to pick on the students that choose to continue to mask. I just would love to see grace across the whole community in this. We're here. This is what we have to do. We have to move forward, but let's still continue to see kindness. And those kids are choosing to mask. It has nothing to do with the kids who choose not to mask. Very simple. That's all.
Ange, thanks for that comment. I think I've at other meetings expressed similar sentiment about how we just need to be nicer to each other. And I think that especially, we're going to be in a situation starting the week of the 28th where we see people in masks and not in masks. Right. And we cannot continue talking to each other the way that we have been in a lot of cases regarding that particular difference. So on the 28th, it looks like if everything stays the same, almost all of the schools, hopefully all of them will be essentially mask optional. We're wording it differently. Masks are strongly recommended, but people will get that choice on the 28th if things stay the same. And I think that that's also important to say. I'm not sure that we need to have, I don't know if we can have two separate votes or if we need one. Just for me, clearly that's very obvious. So, and I'm not going to vote against something that moves us forward. I think I've made my points very clear and some things that I think we need to look at very clear and things that I hope the administration will look at, including the percentage, the positivity percentage. I'm if there's any consideration of them looking at that, because we have another meeting on Tuesday next week, right? So maybe there can be a little more conversation. Like, we keep things moving tonight, and I don't know if we do another vote then. I don't know.
I just want to say, because maybe people that watch or hear or at home don't know that we don't get a chance to talk to each other very often at all. And so we don't. We just don't. The rules of engagement are what they are, and we don't discuss these things unless we're sitting in this room.
Absolutely.
And so because you and I, particularly me, you, just haven't had a chance to talk about this, and I said something earlier, I didn't want it to feel like it was pointed at you about situational masking. If we approve tonight what's on the table in front of us, it does not mean, and Leah said this a minute ago, it does not mean it can't be changed 1 week or 5 days, 4 days from now. I think we all agree, and we said that this is the reason we decided to have this meeting, was that we need to do something. Because if we wait for, I won't name the list of people that are not helping us, if we wait for all those people to make their decisions, to do their things, to give us their recommendations, thank you for the clarification that you were able to give, we'll never do anything.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so this is a step. Mm-hmm. It's a departure from what we said in August. I think it was August, wasn't it?
Yes. Yes.
And so, yeah, I mean, Jess, I don't know if those numbers are perfect or the right ones. I know that the ones they're the ones I can vote on today, and if they need to change, they can change. So that's it. I just wanted to say that to you because I felt like I was kind of pointing at you a little bit when I said that, and I don't like that.
And just to kind of something that always sticks with me when I hear about transparency and and Carlos, you mentioned we don't talk about this outside because we don't. We're not allowed to, and we would not. Something that a former board member said, it was Joel, and I think he said it really, really well. This is a meeting that takes place in the public, but it is not a meeting with the public. So when people see us meet at this table, U-shaped table-ish thing, this is the only meeting that we have. There are not additional meetings. This is a meeting for us to have together that the public is entitled to view and watch, but that's why it's not a two-way, it's not a meeting with the public, it is a meeting in the public. And so there's nothing being hidden, there's no additional conversations because we would not do that, and we do not do that, and we're not allowed to do that.
For clarity, we do have closed session, but everything we talk about in closed session is listed on the agenda. So I have two quick comments. Jeff, earlier I said clear as mud, and I just wanted to make sure you knew that I meant what's happening legally is clear as mud, not your explanation. Your explanation.
My explanation probably was too, but it's
No, your explanation
nature of
was
the
great.
time at this moment.
Clear as it could be.
I also just wanted to clarify one thing for the public's interest. I think, Jess, you made a comment, and at least what I heard was you saying that on February 28th, essentially we're mask optional. I think what the recommendation says is that on February 28th, if it's determined that the district has local control, we're saying the masking would be determined by the school's positivity rate under this plan.
Right, right. And
Okay, I
if
just
we're
want to make
using
sure
our
that
metri-
as
correct.
the
And
public
if we're
hears
using our
this, they
metrics from
understand.
right now, then we would be in that optional / recommended
I just want to make
category.
sure
But
as
it's
the
a good
public hears this, they
clarification.
understand. what
It's a good clarification.
Yeah. So I guess, go ahead.
Just to piggyback on that and to be clear about, Kevin, you had not only the local control piece, but the executive order.
Right.
The status of the executive order is at issue in the appellate court. And so that ruling, again, as soon as we receive it, but that ruling could impact what you're talking about here. Because even if you vote to go to the situational masking or and the appellate court ends up upholding the state mandates, then that leaves you in a different place that, to consider as well. So I think, Kevin, your recommendation was contingent on that?
Right.
Or, okay.
Correct.
Okay. So,
And with that, just for something for the board to think about, I don't think we need to hash it out here, but after, we won't have enough information at our next board meeting. That agenda is set, so while we can have discussions about this, I think if figuring out how things play out, our next meeting is March 15th. And so that may be the first time to see how these, whatever was brought through the courts, and then if this is in place, we can start, Kevin, do you think, to get feedback from the administration, how their implementation is? And I guess the thought from us is we love to have emergency meetings.
March
That good
15th
enough?
feels
When
like
it
a
snows
rough
the
time.
most, if
Right.
possible.
certainly.
Is the 15th good enough? And we can discuss that more, and then if it's not, if that's too late of a time, I think we should bring it up at the next meeting if we need to meet again.
And Kevin, you will wrap whatever happens this evening with the vote up for the parents and the parent update
Right.
that goes out normally as scheduled on Fridays?
Yes.
Okay. So are we ready to move to action items on the mitigation plan as presented?
I'm so sorry. Almost. Adina, to your point, so the agenda is set for next Tuesday and it doesn't include any of this stuff.
But it has the school update on it.
It has the school update.
Has the school update.
There's no
Okay, but
action items.
Not
There's no
any
action items related to this, no.
I think that's a time to basically say if we need to meet before the 15th.
If we need to
Okay.
do some action, we need to bring it
if
up.
we need
next
a
time.
I guess my question is then, so if we approve this, like, we have to stick hard and fast to those numbers, or can they be tweaked after we?
The percentage.
Put it through, yeah.
For Jeff.
We would have to have a special
Percentages
board meeting would be
and-
my
And
guess,
also
but,
the
yeah.
situational, if we just, like, if that's just a disaster, within a week.
But it wouldn't even start till the 28th.
Right.
Right.
At the
Right.
earliest.
Right.
And we don't have an answer yet. So,
So we'll have to have a special board meeting to
That's what
tweak it.
Dina's
Likely we'll
saying.
have
We
to.
may,
Okay.
yeah.
yeah.
Dina's saying basically it's either, we won't before the 28th.
Right.
Have an action item on any agenda before the 28th, and therefore the next opportunity would be the 15th. That's what you said, correct?
Right.
And so we'd have to, if we wanted to have an action item to change those numbers or remove situational masking or whatever, between the 28th and the 15th, we would have to have a special board meeting, and we would want to discuss that at next Tuesday's meeting.
Got it.
Okay.
Just-
Are we ready?
Well, let-
Jeff, go
Just
ahead.
a quick note that, with respect to next Tuesday, if there's a need or desire to discuss it, I mean, it's a 48-hour notice, so if it's necessary, you could modify your agenda. I don't know the logistics of that for you in this case, but
Fair point.
rather than having yet another special
That's a
meeting
fair
next
point.
week. So
Thanks for that.
Okay, so are we ready to vote on the mitigation plan as presented?
So moved.
Wait, that's not me formally
Sorry,
calling.
that's not how-
I'm just
that's
making
not-
sure.
Sorry.
I'm making sure no one wants to
She's
make
okay.
adjustments
She's
before we
making
move
sure.
to the action items. Okay. All right, so here we go. The chair will entertain a motion to amend the 2021-2022 return to school plan approved on August 3rd, 2021 to include updated mitigations.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Avia?
Yes.
Ms. Redonio?
Yes.
Ms. Steckity?
Yes.
Ms. Conover?
Yes.
Ms. Hoover?
Yes.
Mr. Marin?
Yes.
Ms. Coyle?
Yes. Okay. Motion carries. The chair will entertain a motion to enter closed session to discuss personnel issues.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Redonio?
Yes.
Ms. Steckity?
Yes.
Ms. Conover?
Yes.
Ms. Hoover?
Yes.
Mr. Marin?
Yes.
Ms. Coyle?
Yes.
Mr. Avia?
Yes.
No action will take place after closed session. We will come back to the table to adjourn the meeting.